My goodness, has it been 2 years since Marvel Comics announced their new Warrior series from Daniel Kibblesmith? It looked like pure comedy gold. It's one of the most downvoted videos in YouTube history. It's the one that got away. I was looking forward to reading this comic book and then reviewing it for all of you right here on the channel. I kind of forgot about it. I would still love for this damn comic book to be released, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think this thing got stealth canceled. And there was an article recently from CBR, maybe remember it. And they kind of talked about New Warriors and maybe some of the missteps that it had with the rollout and the presentation and the way that they were trying to sell it to people. I was like, this thing was going to be chef's kiss, like Daniel Kibblesmith's magnum opus. You know what I mean? The perfect comic book that really encapsulates everything that Daniel Kibblesmith stands for and he represents within comic books, which is absolute failure. So, man, I really wish Marvel Comics would release this. But what's crazy is if you look at this and we remember what New Warriors were, which is kind of a parody of the people they were trying to represent and, lift up and celebrate within the Marvel Comics universe, we're actually seeing a lot of the things that Daniel Kibblesmith and the creators behind New Warriors were going to be implementing if you read this year's Marvel Pride issue, which is especially egregious and terrible just as far as context and quality and everything about that comic book is pretty much garbage. And it's kind of offensive. It's making fun of the people that it's supposed to be celebrating. And that's what New Warriors was. So we're still getting the New Warriors legacy within Marvel Comics. Now let's go revisit this article so we can revisit all the greatness that we lost when Marvel Comics just decided to throw this one underneath the rug and forget about it. Though there's certainly no Avengers, the New Warriors have quite a history in the Marvel Universe as a hero team, uniting several younger superheroes. The team's heyday was definitely back in the 1990s. Unfortunately, since then, they've been seen as rather disposable by Marvel and are typically vehicles for controversial storytelling. There was no better example of the latter than the planned 2020 relaunch of the team's book. The planned New Warriors relaunch was meant to be a more progressive, modern version of the team that included an original cast. What was shown, however, was a misfire of ideas, despite its inclusive aims. I love how if you have the best intentions within this comic book industry, the people will essentially forgive you. They will be like, you know what, Kibblesmith, he wanted to do the right thing. He was just incapable of doing it. You can't hold him against him that the comic book looked like absolute trash in a parody of the community, which it was meaning to celebrate. Of course, we get that a lot in Marvel Comics. No better example than the Pride issue. But I think of New Warriors, I don't really think about super controversial storytelling, though. I think about Marvel Civil War. They're the reason that Civil War happened, right? They accidentally murdered all those people in that neighborhood. Next thing you know, they wanted to make superheroes illegal. Next thing you know, you got Captain America fighting Iron Man going full heel. We had Captain America beat the piss out of the Punisher. The Punisher just take it because he loved Captain America. I think Daredevil called Iron Man Judas. Pretty good moment in that comic book. I kind of appreciated that. So I like Marvel Comics Civil War. A lot of people say it's garbage, but I think it's actually pretty damn good storytelling. It did admittedly kind of destroy Tony Stark pretty much forever within comic books. You would have thought Robert Downey Jr. would have brought that bad boy back, but he has not been able to escape the legacy of Civil War, which was all started because of the New Warriors, because they're idiots. And they murdered a bunch of people pretty much on accident, trying to save the day because they are a team of incompetent buffoons, which would have made sense with this New Warriors relaunch. These New Warriors recruits were Screen Time, B-Negative, Trailblazer, Snowflake, and who could forget about Safespace. Intended to make the New Warriors more accurate, these teams were meant to be reflective of the modern world and its demographics. The result was a series of questionable ideas that are for some reason played straight. For instance, Screen Time was a character described as being obsessed with memes, having gained superpowers after being exposed to experimental internet gas. I thought I read that wrong the first time. I thought it was supposed to be inert gas, but it was internet gas. It actually sounds quite funny. Well, this author's interpretation of funny and my interpretation of funny obviously are vastly different, but the fact that so much of this was meant to be taken seriously was perhaps the biggest problem. Maybe that was one of the problems. I don't know if it's the biggest. He does say the other characters are somewhat better, with Trailblazer and Goth Vampire B-Negative not being quite as unintentionally stereotypical. Oh my goodness. B-Negative actually had ties to Morbius, the living vampire, having received his powers from a similar experiment. Hey, if the best thing you can say about New Warriors was be negative, wasn't as offensive as the rest of the characters, I don't think that's exactly a compliment. And saying that Trailblazer wasn't offensive or might have been the breakout like good character, that also tells you just how bad this was. Trailblazer, I believe, had a magic backpack. So obviously stealing that from Dora the Explorer. I believe was also from the rainforest regions of South America, kind of stealing some more things from Dora the Explorer, except this time, instead of being like a little kid that could probably actually go out and backpack and hit the trails, Trailblazer was obese. It was like, what are you guys doing? I get you want like body positive like characters, but let's not make their personalities clash with what your body positivity is trying to say. Now, hey, I've met a few people that were portly and could run. Like I knew a guy that was pretty fat and ran marathons, but man, he ran a lot, and he must have eaten a lot to stay fat. Because I didn't know. But I don't know, whatever, man. Trailblazer was a stupid idea, but obviously, be negative, Trailblazer, screen time, those weren't the ideas that got all the attention. CBR addresses it next. Then there were the siblings, Snowflake and Safespace, whose ironic names were only the beginning of their problems. The two were gifted with cryogenic and force field powers. Their names reflected these abilities as much as they did the offensive slang that they're derived from. Apparently, the idea was that these two, one of whom was non-binary, were reclaiming the words, empowering themselves by using monikers meant to hurt them. It ended up coming off more as a self-parody, or like something supposedly created by the alt-right in order to make fun of such concepts. The alt-right could never purposely make as much fun of their enemies as their enemies do themselves. Daniel Kibblesmith is the one that made fun of Snowflake in Safespace. I don't even know why you put the alt-right in there. That's one of those terms that's just thrown around willy-nilly. It means nothing anymore. So people that thought it was a joke, like, oh, that's what people that are mean would have used to make fun of the characters. It's like, yeah, because it's stupid. That's why it was a bad idea. It wasn't just conservatives that were downvoting that goddamn video. It was the people it was supposed to be representing. People that were non-binary was pissed off about Snowflake and Safespace because it was such an insulting representation of their culture and who they are. It was like, but that's who Daniel Kibblesmith is. In a lot of ways, that's what Marvel Comics is. They're literally making fun of the people that they're supposed to be uplifting and celebrating on a weekly basis, pretty much now. Every representation, for the most part, within Marvel and even DC is pretty much a joke at this point. There are no characters if you're representing certain groups within Marvel Comics. If you're going to be part of LGBT, you're pretty much going to be a caricature. And that's one of the reasons a lot of these characters do fall flat and they fail. Another big reason is putting dipshit, non-talented writers like Daniel Kibblesmith on the character. You want a character not to succeed? Put Daniel fucking Kibblesmith on the character and see what he could do with it. He will make that character not succeed beyond your wild imaginations. Another writer you can do that with, Danny Lord. That's the writer. That's the creator behind Blade's daughter. Oh, that character is going to take off because there's going to be so much great characterization from the effervescent mind of fucking Danny Lord. VIL is another one. We saw what happened with Children of the Atom. Like, oh my goodness. How about we just get some creative people that actually like comic books? And maybe just don't hate the history of comic books and basically 85% of the actual readers. So I think a lot of these writers, they go in with the mindset like, you know what? I'm going to fucking piss off everybody that's ever liked the comic publisher that I'm working for. And I'm going to stick it to it. I'm going to let them know I own the publisher now. It's like, well, maybe. I bet you don't get paid much until you sell a lot of comic books. And with that attitude, you're never going to sell a lot of comic books. You're just going to be poor, begging for money the rest of your life. You don't want to be that person, right? That's how we get fucking Steve Orlando is being touted as like this big, successful superstar creator at Marvel Comics. Because literally, when you look at the rest of their creators, maybe he is a superstar. When you look at what fucking Steve Orlando has done, maybe he is a superstar. If we went back to DC Comics, he'd be writing Superman and Batman. He's so much more accomplished than all those writers. And it's like, hey, when Steve Orlando is an example of somebody that was successful in comparison to the rest of the writers, you got a problem. That's why a lot of things aren't working at Marvel Comics. And one of the reasons I need this goddamn New Warriors comic book to come out, I want to talk about it with you guys. I want to see all of my worst fears not only confirmed, but I want to go further than that. I want it to be more insulting to the people it's trying to represent and celebrate than I could have possibly imagined. Kind of like what Marvel Comics Pride 2022 was. That thing was magnificent. It should be encased in glass, surrounded by cement, buried 200 feet underneath the surface of the earth, so that, in 100 years we could dig it up and we can remember just how bad Marvel Comics were on their worst day, which would have been June of 2022 during Pride Month. Oh my goodness. But I got a feeling New Warriors was even worse. When the COVID-19 pandemic began to wreak havoc across the world, governments responded by shutting down their countries. This slowed commerce and business to a sharp halt, with many comic book publishers responding by canceling many of their scheduled titles. There's been no news on the book, with both Marvel and the creative team remaining silent on its fate. The listing for the first issue on Comixology has also been removed. Given that it's been 2 years, it's all but guaranteed to have been canceled, keeping even the first issue from ever reaching comic book store shelves. Since they refuse to comment on its existence anyway, it's best if Marvel Comics simply ignore and forget their previous plans for the New Warriors title, or at least officially cancel it. Do not cancel this goddamn comic book. I'm begging you, Marvel, please. I know you probably don't like me, but if you want to do something nice for me, maybe change my mind about you and your publishing efforts, just put the damn comic book out. We know you got at least one issue done. It's lettered, it's colored, it's probably fully finished, it's ready to be printed. It's probably got the file ready and everything. Just print the damn thing. Let us see it. Put it out on digital. I dare you, do something. Don't cancel this thing. It's going to be pure gold. My channel needs this. My channel needs Marvel Comics to be as bad as they can be on their very worst day. As bad as they were in Marvel Voices Pride 2022. And I have a feeling this was the comic book that was going to really set the tone in a lot of ways. I think that Marvel Comics did employ a lot of these practices that were basically roundly rejected and made fun of and pretty much hated across the entire comic book, not just comic book reading landscape, the pop culture landscape. Everybody was talking about this goddamn thing and how embarrassing it was. And that's probably why it was smart that Marvel Comics didn't put out too much preview material for Marvel Voices Pride 2022. That way it wouldn't have got lambasted and everyone going like, oh my goodness, they're making fun of us. They're not celebrating Pride Month. They're not celebrating the LGBTQ community, how diverse it is. They're actually making fun of all of us. And that's who Marvel Comics is. Now, I am talking about one story specifically. Marvel Comics introduced 4 new trans heroes to the DT, and this thing was absolutely embarrassing. If you missed this, and if you haven't seen what happened in Marvel Voices Pride 2022, this is as good as it gets, and the rest of the issue is just as bad. You got to see this.